Still a couple of weeks. Clemson, Alabama, the first two teams out. What's your reaction? Anything stick out to you from this ranking?
Well, just to add on to what I was saying, to me, this committee, you're starting to get a picture of what they're looking at. Yeah, they're going to look at the metrics. We're going to look at strength of schedule, and we're going to look at all these different things. But when you look at clearly what they did with the two lost teams, Georgia and Tennessee above one lost team, they're clearly saying it doesn't matter about the number in the right-hand side of the column as far as the losses. We're going to decide by watching these games who's the better team. And I think if you feel like that you have an opportunity for the college football playoff, you go out. It matters how you play in the game. It matters what you put on tape because they're watching the tape. And for me, as a guy who's played, I think that's refreshing to see.
And Boise State finally cracked number 12. They were 12, 13, 12. Now they've gone up to 11. And Greg, you mentioned it. You want to see the gap between Boise State and the Big 12, which Arizona State comes in at number 16. So there's 5 spots. And so with 2 weeks left, you get into that game, the biggest question is going to be, can the Big 12 find its way, can its champion find its way to jump in front of Boise State and get the bye in that first week? That'll be interesting to me.
One thing I think is really interesting, we've been talking a lot about strength of schedule metrics and all this. Like, how many times have we been talking about that for the last few weeks? What the committee has basically told us is that while strength of schedule is valued, it is by no means the end-all, be-all. I think game control and strength of record, if we're looking at metrics, those are the metrics that seemingly are more beneficial to this version of the committee, because you look at some of the teams that are in the top 5 right now, or in the top 10 right now. You have SMU, 77. You have Clemson, who is sitting there at 12. They're 57. You have Miami, who's 59. You have Indiana, who's 51. All that's fine. I'm not saying they got it wrong. I'm just suggesting that that's something that maybe we didn't know about this committee. Here we are talking about, well, who they played. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's more about how you look. And some of these teams, I think, are being ranked highly because of that. Well,
and that's where the coaches in the room make a difference. Because we don't, I never want this to come down to, you know what, let's look at a number. 2 + 2 is 4 + 2. Like, I don't want that. Let's go. Let's watch the games, see who the better teams are. Now, at some point, there's a line of differentiation when you come. You can't have 4 losses and we still think you're good. But at a certain point, I can watch the games and determine who's better. To me, that's how it should be.
Yeah. Well, everyone has a vote. And some people may be thinking that. And some people may be looking at the metrics that Greg is looking at. I think that's why this committee is so special, because you get 13 people with a different view of things. Yeah. And we sit on this desk and always have these conversations. We have different opinions. That's why it's so good. And they've been really good at getting the teams. I think when we look at the teams that are in right now, there's not much to argue about this.
There have been, in the past rankings, there have been some stacking up 1 loss, 2 loss, but they've started to change that up a little bit. Maybe, you know, they go in with a blank slate. People might reconsider things. And when we talk about the strength of schedule numbers, we've spoken a lot, and I've spoken a lot about Indiana's prior to last week. It was in the 100s. It jumped 50 spots. I've been watching this a long time. Right. I don't recall that happening. And our projections show, I feel like we're doing election night coverage, but the projections show that even after playing Purdue, who might be the worst team in Power 4 football, maybe one of the worst teams in the country, still only going to fall maybe in the 60s or something like that. It's not going to fall as much as it rose after they played Ohio State. Heather Dinich, who follows this closely for us, does such a terrific job standing over at the touchscreen, got the bracket right there in front of you. Heather, what jumps out to you about this latest edition of the rankings?
Well, a couple of things. One, in a matter of weeks, the ACC has gone from 1 team to 3 teams, right? And Clemson, with a win against South Carolina, as you guys talked about, could be very big to jump in, but can it bump them above Boise State? Because if it doesn't, they are still out at that number 12 spot for the projected Big 12 champion. Another thing to watch moving forward with rivalry week is Georgia playing a common opponent with Miami and Georgia Tech, the one team that they lost to. Georgia beats Georgia Tech. Is that enough for the committee to flip them? Does it really matter? It could matter for seeding. If Georgia plays Texas, loses to Texas in the SEC championship game, gets in as an at-large bid. And here's one other strange, controversial thing to pay attention to in this ranking. We are talking about the possibility of the Big 12 champion ultimately jumping Boise State and getting a bye, which is possible. But people need to know that the 5 highest ranked conference champions are not guaranteed to the Power 4. And if you look down in the ranking, Tulane is sneaking around there. What happens if you have a 3-loss Big 12 champion? And Tulane runs the table and wins the American Athletic Conference as a 2-loss champion. Now, I am not projecting, as we stand here today, that they would get that 5th highest ranked spot and bump out the Big 12, but I am saying it could open the door for that debate, and people need to know the rules, that it's not a reservation for the Power 4 conferences.
That's a great point, Heather. And the one thing is you look at the rankings, they do have Kansas State ranked, and Kansas State beat Tulane earlier this year, and Kansas State's highly unlikely to be in the Big 12 championship game. So great thing to keep an eye on. Tulane may be better right now. That may come into play as well. Can you even imagine?
Tulane's good now.
They're really good. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. But they lost their 2 games against Power 4 opponents. They lost to Kansas State, lost to Oklahoma. So tall hill to climb, but they have improved. Those were early on.
No doubt about it.
Great thing to keep an eye on. Oh, man, Brett Yormark, the commissioner.
Heads would explode.
The commissioner, oh, my goodness. Can you imagine you go Mountain West, go Mountain West American, or let SMU get knocked off this week and then
thought last year was controversial.
Yeah.
This year's going to be real controversial.
Yeah.
We got some.